Shannon Christian, age 21, and Christopher Newsom, age 23, reveled in social gatherings and relished every opportunity to connect with friends. The odd part was that they failed to show up for a prearranged meeting. Their closest friend was celebrating a birthday in Knoxville, Tennessee, USA. The couple's no-show, coupled with their unresponsiveness to texts and calls, was alarming. At that moment, no one anticipated it was the beginning of one of the most horrific crimes in the state's history. Shannon Christian was born in 1985 in the small town of Nacogdoches, Texas, which had a population of just over 30,000 people. She had older brothers, Jason and Chase. Her parents cherished their children, given her mother's prior struggles with conception. The doctors had expressed doubts about her ever becoming a mother. They endured a difficult journey to parenthood, a fact they deeply valued. When Shannon turned 12, the family relocated to the larger city of Knoxville, IN, seeking better opportunities. She grew up surrounded by family and friends, while also pursuing her education. She was close to her parents, especially her mother, Dina. Dina possessed a unique ability to listen and offered objective solutions, making her a confidant for friends and acquaintances. Shannon inherited this skill from her mother. Unsurprisingly, after high school, she pursued a sociology degree in college. Unlike most young people eager to separate from their parents, she saw no issue living with them, given their close bond. She could study in peace and discuss her newfound knowledge with her mother. They often shared intimate conversations, dreaming of a bright future, a wedding, and the 4 children she desired. Despite living at home, she was independent and determined to carve her own path. To gain financial independence, she worked 2 jobs while studying. She secured a job just months before the tragedy. This allowed Shannon to save enough money to purchase a silver Toyota 4Runner SUV. The car was a source of genuine pride for her. Her boyfriend, Hugh Christopher Newsom Jr., was born in '83 in Knoxville. He was a long-awaited child for his parents, who adored him from day one. He was energetic, only calming down when he went to bed. He loved sports, excelling at baseball. He also enjoyed working with his hands, which led him to woodworking and creating crafts for his family. As a teenager, he took up 2-wheelers and aspired to become a mechanic. Later, he returned to carpentry to study it professionally. Into adulthood, he still enjoyed sports, playing baseball, golf, and tennis, and also enjoyed fishing. But this didn't stop Chris from being a friendly, kind guy. He made friends easily and was supportive of his family and friends. The couple met in 2006 when Shannon was 21 and Chris was 23. Friends of Chris's parents sought advice from Shannon's mother. Through them, they met quite by chance, but immediately connected and began spending all their free time together. They frequently organized outdoor dates, and playing golf was one of their favorite activities. They held endless conversations while walking between holes. Their family and friends were confident in their future together. They believed that the couple would marry soon, and everything was pointing that way. No one could have predicted that someone would want to take their young lives in the most cynical and cruel manner possible. On the evening of January 6, 2007, Chris, 23, and Shannon, 21, were preparing for a dinner date. Following that, they were scheduled to attend a party celebrating a mutual friend's birthday. In the afternoon, she went to her friend's house to get ready for the date. The others were preparing for the party. Shannon packed her belongings in a bag and went to an apartment in Washington Ridge. She left her car in the parking lot. Around 8 p.m., she waited for her boyfriend in the parking lot to go to dinner. Chris was delayed dropping off a friend, which caused some frustration for Shannon. After reuniting, they exchanged a few tense words, but then embraced and immediately calmed down. But they never made it to their destination, and no one ever saw them again. The lovers simply disappeared. In the early morning hours of January 7th, Shannon's mother woke up with an uneasy feeling. She went to her daughter's room and found that Tanya had returned home during the night. There were no clues about her whereabouts. Dina dialed the missing person's cell phone number several times, but each time her call went to voicemail. She noticed several missed calls from unknown numbers since the previous night. After unsuccessful attempts to contact her daughter, she called one of the numbers. One of her daughter's friends answered immediately, amplifying her anxiety. He explained he had been trying to call Dina to check on Shannon. Neither she nor her boyfriend had shown up at the party. They were both responsible individuals who wouldn't miss a promised event, which was very strange. Both were unreachable. Concerned, Shannon's friends returned to the house where the girls had said goodbye a few hours earlier. They found Chris's pickup truck in the parking lot, but no sign of her vehicle or the couple. Later, Shannon's employer contacted her mother to report her absence from work, prompting the principal to inquire about her well-being. At this point, Dina's worry intensified to the point of fearing for her child's life. She decided to call Chris's parents, but they had been unable to reach their son and were also worried. Together, the parents of the missing contacted the police. However, they were informed that a 24-hour waiting period was required before a missing person report could be filed. The authorities dismissed the parents' concerns, assuming the couple had simply lost track of time and were spending time with friends. The parents explained that this was entirely out of character for their children, who never disappeared without a trace and were always in contact. But it was to no avail. Adhering to the 24-hour waiting period, the police declined to act. The families of the missing were then forced to take matters into their own hands. The parents began by searching the parking lot area, the last known location of Chris and Shannon, but they found nothing. Simultaneously, they and friends called everyone they knew in the city services where their children could have gone. But it didn't help. No one had seen the missing individuals. On the afternoon of January 7th, a railroad worker reported to the police that he had found a man's body in very bad condition near the tracks. It was severely burned and left on a stone embankment. The police arrived at the site and examined the human remains. It appeared to be a young male, with no distinguishing characteristics immediately evident. The families of the missing individuals were informed of the discovery, but a forensic examination was necessary to identify the charred remains. They held on to hope that their children were still alive, and both families and the young couple's loved ones maintained their search efforts. They checked the location data from Shannon's cell phone and discovered that its final signal pinged in an area across the street, near a cell tower. This was a high-crime area of the city, where the couple had no reason to be. It wasn't on the route to their friends, nor was it a place they could stumble upon by accident. Reaching this location required a drive of about 10 kilometers. This suggested that the young people either intended to purchase something illegal in this dangerous area or were brought there against their will. On the morning of Monday, January 8th, the parents began searching the troubled neighborhood for the missing youth. They drove around and questioned locals. Shannon's car was eventually discovered in an alley. Upon examining the vehicle, the families noticed that all identifying markings that could have helped visually identify the car had been removed from the interior. This was clearly done intentionally. All of the girls' personal belongings, including window stickers, a teddy bear, and even the photos on the dashboard, were gone. Even the chargers for her cell phone and headphones were missing. The car seat was pushed back so far that the driver wouldn't have been able to reach the pedals in that position. Although neither Shan nor her boyfriend Chris smoked, a pack of cigarettes was found between the front seats. The area around the pedals was stained with dirt, a condition the owner would never have allowed in her car. She took great pride in her car, considering it her first significant independent purchase, and was meticulous about its cleanliness. All of this indicated that strangers with bad intentions had been in the car. Something terrible might have happened to the young couple. They were likely kidnapped and held hostage. However, no ransom demands ever came. The parents immediately informed law enforcement. With 24 hours having passed since their disappearance, the police had already begun their investigation. They took the girls' car and everything they could find to the families of the young lovers for examination. Meanwhile, forensic experts had already reached initial conclusions about the body found on the railroad tracks. It was the body of a male, and the investigators were struck by the level of violence inflicted on the victim. The body had gunshot wounds to the head, neck, and body, as well as abrasions and signs of a brutal beating. Experts even found male fluids inside the body, indicating rape. The deceased was missing shoes, and his feet were covered in mud. His body was wrapped in a blanket, and his hoodie was pulled over his head. After analyzing the evidence, forensic experts determined that the body was that of the missing Christopher Newsom. The fire had a devastating effect on Chris's body, destroying virtually all the evidence the police could use. Law enforcement advised the boy's parents not to attend the identification. All they had seen since the gruesome discovery was a black plastic bag, which they were spared from opening due to the horrific nature of the scene. Despite this, Shannon's parents remained hopeful about finding the girl alive. However, there was resentment over the police's inaction during the first 24 hours. Their possible negligence condemned the second victim, who remained missing. Following their findings, the police intensified the search for Shannon and dedicated all available resources to the case. There was a risk that the relatives' unprofessional and negligent inspection of her car had damaged some crucial evidence. But fortunately, the officers were able to locate the item that ultimately led them to the crime scene, 2316 Shipman Street. This was the address written on an envelope that detectives discovered between the seats of the missing woman's car. Apparently, the perpetrators had accidentally dropped it. The house was located 10 kilometers from where the missing persons were last seen alive and only 2 blocks from the alley where Shannon's car was found. The officers immediately examined the envelope for fingerprints and found what they were looking for. They uploaded the data into a database and found that the prints belonged to Lemera Coos Davidson, who had recently been released from prison after serving a 5-year sentence. He had previously been convicted of aggravated carjacking. Naturally, he became the prime suspect in Chris's murder and Shannon's disappearance. The police arrived at the criminal's home at night. He lived in an older dwelling that he rented out. The neighborhood was primarily industrial, with only a few residential houses nearby. No one answered the knock on the door, but the police had every reason to believe the girl was still alive and being held inside. So, the officers forced entry by kicking down the door. With each step, the police found more and more of the missing young people's belongings. There were Shannon's headphones, Chris's shoes, and his baseball cap. They realized they were on the right track. But the real disappointment awaited law enforcement officers next when they found a large kitchen trash can. Inside, they found a dirty sheet with a bulky garbage bag underneath. When the police opened it, they found the body of 21-year-old Shannon. Investigators immediately informed the girl's parents that she would never come home again. Unlike the young man's remains, which were disfigured by the fire, the girl's body was relatively intact. It became a real torture map and horrified the forensic experts and police officers who examined it. Everyone was shocked by the extent of the atrocities the innocent victim had endured. Shannon was wearing only a tank top. Her entire body was covered in large bruises and contusions, as well as numerous deep stab wounds and horrific burns. Detectives also found the perpetrator's male fluids on her body, along with his DNA and fingerprints. Some of these matched marks on the trash can and packages found in the car. Their owner was the same Lemera Davidson. Additionally, the house, which had become a real torture chamber, contained numerous cartridges from the same gun used to shoot the boyfriend of the tortured student. However, the bloodthirsty killer himself was not in the house. It was empty. Apparently, the criminal realized the police would come for him and went on the run. He was placed on the wanted list. The police launched a full-scale manhunt for the villain, but they didn't suspect that the criminal was far from the only person who participated in the torture and witnessed the young people's final moments. After analyzing Lemerica's cell phone, investigators concluded that he had repeatedly called a man named Eric Boyd during those days. The jig was up, and the very next day, the authorities pulled the guy's car over. They directly asked him where Davidson was. Eric Boyd put up a fight, trying to dodge the questions, but when push came to shove, he gave up his partner in crime. Eric made it clear that he wasn't going to do time for someone else's crimes. So he told the officers that the prime suspect was in the house they had robbed on the same day they kidnapped the young couple. Eric led the officers to one of the vacant houses for sale near the offender's home. There, they found numerous trash bags, food wrappers, clothing, a cell phone, a gun, and binoculars. But most importantly, Lemera Davidson was in the middle of the chaos. Officers immediately arrested him and took him to the station. As it turned out, The villain was wearing Nike sneakers that had been taken from the murdered young man. During the interrogation, the criminal tried to play the victim as best he could. He spun 5 different versions of the events that led Chris and Shannon to his torture table. First, he claimed the young men had come to his home on their own, but they were followed by the criminal's acquaintances. They beat up the couple, and Davidson claimed he didn't want to get involved, as the odds were stacked against him. So, he decided to leave the scene. He used the girl's car to drive off and sell drugs in a nearby neighborhood until the attackers cooled down. After the trip, Lamaricus ditched the vehicle in an alley. When he got back home, the girl was supposedly still tied up and begging to be freed, but he stayed out of it. Lamaricus denied any involvement in her boyfriend's death and also denied having sex with Shannon, even though his semen was later found on her body. The 2 young men allegedly involved in attacking the slain men were George Thomas and Lethal Wiskebins. The former was the prime suspect's best friend, and the latter was his half-brother. They were arrested on January 11th for their part in the murder. However, the list of those involved in the brutal execution didn't end there. Eric Boyd was also included, the same guy who revealed Lamaricus' hiding place. Later, Davidson said their friend Vanessa Coleman also participated in the torture. At the time of the crime, the girl was only 18 years old, and the guys were between 24 and 35. Together, the apprehended perpetrators recounted the last gruesome hours of Shannon Chris' life. Each of the accused contributed to the evidence the police managed to uncover. At the same time, they constantly tried to downplay their roles and blame their accomplices. As it turned out, Lamaricus was the ringleader of the criminal gang. That evening, he needed a vehicle to deliver substances to a customer. As luck would have it, he and his accomplice ran into Shannon, who was chatting with her boyfriend in the parking lot. Instead of just stealing her car, they decided to eliminate the witnesses. They, threatening with weapons, kidnapped the car and brought the victims to their ringleader's home, where a real hell awaited them. Latalvez claimed he didn't have any sexual relations with either victim, but DNA analysis showed he raped the girl, the same thing the gang leader did repeatedly. The girl involved in the massacre said she was as much a hostage as the victims of the crime. She claimed that, because she feared for her life, she was forced to go along with the killers and help torture the young couple, even though it was unpleasant for her. After extensive analysis and data collection from all participants in the execution, law enforcement was able to reconstruct the chain of horrific abuse that led to the deaths of 2 innocent people. Shannon and Chris were tied up in the girl's car immediately after the abduction. They were thrown into the back seats before being driven to the group leader's home. They were tied up so they couldn't escape and gagged. The girl was left in the living room, and the boy was taken to the next room, where he was tied up and repeatedly raped. Several people did this at once, but it couldn't be determined exactly who. In the morning, the guy was taken out of the house on chains like a dog, then thrown into the trunk of a car. The victim was brought to the railroad and forced to walk barefoot on the sharp stones of the embankment. He walked forward 20 meters, after which he was shot once in the back and once in the neck, but these shots didn't kill Chris. The fatal shot was a headshot fired moments later at point-blank range. The bullet severed the brain stem, ending the torture of an innocent man. The perpetrators then doused the body with gasoline and set it on fire to destroy most of the evidence of torture. During this time, Shannon was fighting for her life in the murderous ringleader's house, with no idea what fate had befallen her lover. Returning after the first murder, the criminals attacked the hostage. She was beaten for a long time, as evidenced by numerous severe head injuries. Then they tied her to a chair and raped her repeatedly. The girl was then thrown to the floor again and beaten on the face, head, and groin area for a long time. For 2 days, she was beaten and raped, leaving numerous lacerations in her perineum. She was bleeding internally, but continued to live. After some time, the criminals decided to eliminate all traces of their atrocities. They came up with the idea of using bleach. All 5 of them poured it over the body of the still-living girl and tried to scrape off their fingerprints, any DNA. They poured the chemical on her open wounds, but that wasn't enough. They began to pour bleach directly into Shannon's throat to cleanse her from the inside. The perpetrators tried to scrape off the entire surface of her skin, but even after that, the girl remained alive and kept begging them to let her go, to keep her alive. But they were completely indifferent to her pleas. After that, they put a garbage bag over her head. Tied to Shannon alive, they packed her into garbage bags and stuffed her into a bucket in the kitchen. Here she slowly and painfully died. The medical examiners couldn't say for sure how long Shannon's agonizing and slow death took. However, the extreme brutality of the torture was reliably documented. The sadistic marks and injuries were so severe that the condition of the body didn't even fit the description of a brutal rape and murder. It was too much, even for experienced police and forensic scientists. Her lip was completely torn, and her neck was also broken, apparently during the beating. After leaving the victim suffocating in a dumpster, the criminals simply walked away. After the massacre, Lamarcus gave some of Shannon's belongings to his friend Vanessa, who also participated in the torture. The police found it all at her home during a search. Investigators didn't believe the detainee, Vanessa Coleman, was a victim of the situation because she could have informed the police immediately after leaving the gang leader's house, but she didn't. During the search of the woman's residence, a diary was discovered where she vividly detailed the heinous acts perpetrated upon the couple, portraying them as a summer escapade. The tone of her writing and the evident joy in her emotions left no doubt that she was a full participant in the torture. Lamarcus Davidson and George Thomas faced charges on 16 counts, including capital murder, rape, robbery, kidnapping, and especially aggravated murder. Vanessa was charged with 12 counts, encompassing murder, involvement in rape, robbery, kidnapping, and theft. Evidence showed her active participation in the brutalization of both victims. Eric Boyd was charged with 20 counts of aggravated rape, kidnapping, and theft. A fifth perpetrator, Lethal Viscabins, was charged with 20 counts mirroring the charges against the rest of the group. However, the ordeal for the victims' families continued. The trial spanned nearly 2 years, during which the case's status and other details underwent numerous revisions. The ringleader presented a bizarre new account during the trial. He claimed the murdered couple had willingly sought him out for rough sex. He stated that things were initially consensual, but then his accomplices arrived, exceeding boundaries and brutally assaulting the young people. Unsurprisingly, this narrative was met with widespread disbelief. Despite their desperate efforts, the defense attorneys were unable to secure their clients' acquittals. The jury found all defendants guilty on most counts. The relatives of the victims demanded the death penalty for these individuals, as the scope of their crimes defied conventional criminal definitions. There were simply no suitable terms to describe them. Lamarcus Davidson was convicted on all counts, receiving the death penalty and an additional 80-year prison sentence. Eric Boyd, George Thomas, and Lethal Viscabins were sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. In 2010, Vanessa was acquitted of first-degree murder but still received a 53-year prison sentence for the remaining lesser charges. Unexpectedly, all those involved in the torture attempted to appeal their sentences. In January 2011, Judge Baumgartner announced his resignation, admitting to substance abuse. This revelation brought into question the validity of the convictions, along with dozens of other cases. The state Supreme Court ruled that due to the presence of DNA evidence in the convictions of Davidson and Cobbins, their convictions would stand, while the others would be subject to review. Consequently, Vanessa was found guilty on the same charges but had her sentence reduced, now facing 35 years in prison. George Thomas, initially sentenced to life without parole, was granted parole after 51 years for cooperating with the prosecution. Vanessa and Thomas continued to appeal, but all were dismissed. Eric Boyd pleaded guilty to a new 36 counts and was slated for a retrial in 2019. His guilt on almost all counts was affirmed through the testimony of co-defendant George Thomas. Eric was sentenced to 2 life terms without parole, plus an additional 90 years in prison. In 2014, Vanessa became eligible for parole after only 7 years in prison, but her appeals were fortunately denied. The most recent denial occurred in 2020, when the board determined she wouldn't be eligible for parole until 2030. In 2008, the house where the two young men were tortured was demolished, and a memorial to Shannon and Chris was erected in its place. If you found this information insightful, consider subscribing to the channel. Support this video with a like, and let's discuss this unsettling story in the comments. I also recommend these related videos. Thank you and goodbye.